Donald Pee Wee Gaskins once stated after his arrest that he was born special and fortunate. That statement would appear to many as a sick joke, but Pee Wee never joked. Born March the 13th, 1933, in rural Florence County, South Carolina, to a part-time prostitute, Yulia Parrott, and a father who didn't stick around long enough to sign the birth certificate. Gaskins was known for the first 13 years of his life as Junior Parrott, his mother's maiden name, or simply as Pee Wee, a derisive reference to his size. His mother apparently took so little interest in him, apart from when she could sell him for sex to her regular Johns, that the first time he learned his given name, Donald, was when it was read out in his first court appearance. Gaskins was alternatively beaten, sexually abused, or simply ignored by a series of brutal stepdaddies. His mother finally married one of them in 1943, the union adding 4 half-siblings to the family. The new man of the house beat Gaskins and his other children just for practice, as Pee Wee recalled, but the violence was part of daily life, so much so that Gaskins steadfastly insisted that
I certainly weren't in no way what you could ever call abused. Being born on a farm, I know the difference between raising something and it just growing. You raise tobacco and vegetables and pigs and sheep. They got purpose. You tend them. But weeds grow on their own, tended or not. I grew. I wasn't raised, that's for damn sure.
At a young age, Donald Gaskins was teased and given the nickname Pee Wee as a result of his small body frame. When he was 1 year old, Gaskins reportedly drank a bottle of kerosene, which caused him to have sporadic convulsions until the age of 3. Whether he was born bad or had it beaten and raped into him is debatable. Still, something was obviously wrong with Junior Parrott. He was pissed off at girls from his earliest memory, unable to explain the rage coherently. By the age of 10, he suffered from the onset of a lifelong bothersomeness, described as a feeling like
a ball of molten lead rolling around in my guts and up my spine and into my head.
Pee Wee eventually realized the best way to deal with this bothersomeness was his homemade cure, which unfortunately meant death for others. At age 11, Donald Gaskins decided the academic life was not for him, and left school behind to work on cars at a local garage. While working there, he met 2 boys, Danny and Marsh, who decided to team up and terrorize the neighborhood. Starting off small with thefts of gasoline from service stations after closing time, they soon graduated to residential burglaries, and were given seasoned advice and tips by Danny's ex-convict father. With the proceeds from their robberies, they had enough to buy an old car, which allowed them to extend the range of their criminal enterprises, finishing off a successful outing by visiting prostitutes in Charleston and Columbia. Their sexual experiments also included younger boys, who were silenced with threats of violence. But the troubled trio's escapades came to an end after they gang-raped Marsh's younger sister. Threats and promises of cash didn't work this time, and the parents decided a lecture would not be sufficient. Danny's father defended his son with a shotgun, but Gaskins and Marsh were strung up by their wrists in a barn, and whipped bloody by parents wielding a leather strap in relays. Danny and Marsh left the area shortly after that. Donald Gaskins continued to break into homes alone. In 1946, a girl who knew him from around the neighborhood interrupted him while he was burglarizing her home. She struck him a blow with an axe. He managed to grab it away from her, striking her in the head and arm, before fleeing the scene. Luckily, the girl survived the attack. Gaskins was arrested and convicted for assault with a deadly weapon and intent to kill. The judge found him guilty as charged and consigned him to the South Carolina Industrial School for Boys until his 18th birthday. Gaskins would later say that he received his real education at the State Reformatory near Florence, a few miles from where he grew up. His second night there, he was ambushed in the shower, beaten and gang-raped by a group of 20 boys. Afterwards, he accepted protection from his dormitory's boss boy, who demanded daily sex and other services, while sometimes passing Gaskins around to his friends. It was undoubtedly a terrible time in his life, and one that scarred him with hatred. 13 months after his arrival, he fled the reform school with 4 other inmates. They were quickly rounded up the next afternoon, but Gaskins leapt from the truck, taking them back to Florence. He made it as far as the hideout he had once shared with his delinquent pals, the Trouble Trio. A local lawman sniffed him out there and persuaded him to surrender. His reward for surrendering? 30 lashes with a strap, and 30 days hard labor and isolation, digging ditches in the sweltering heat, with whippings every night for contrived infractions. After serving out his punishment, Gaskins was sent back to his dorm, and the boss boy who was waiting for him. Gaskins' desperate attempts to escape confinement resulted in physical altercations with guards, and he was sent off for observation at a state mental hospital. Doctors found him sane enough to return to the reform school, and after a few nights he escaped again and managed to join up with a traveling carnival. While with the troupe, he married a 13-year-old girl and made the decision to turn himself in to the police and finish his sentence at the reform school. He was released in March 1951 on his 18th birthday. After serving his time in reform school, he began working on a tobacco farm. There he got involved in insurance fraud. He and another drifter thought they could make some extra cash when a local farmer suggested they do deals with other tobacco farmers to burn down their barns for a fee. Around the area, people began to ponder about Gaskins' involvement with the barn fires. When his employer's daughter questioned him about the barn fires, he panicked and split the girl's skull with a hammer. Once again they put him away for 5 years, this time in prison, for assault with a deadly weapon and attempted murder. Because of his diminutive size, he feared further sexual domination, and so committed his first murder in an attempt to become a power man. Power man is a status allotted to the most feared inmates. Gaskins decided killing a fellow inmate would be enough to keep the other inmates from bothering him. Actions speak louder than words. He set his sights on one of the most feared inmates in the prison, Hazel Brazel. Gaskins managed to ingratiate himself with Brazel, gain his trust, then ultimately cut his throat. He was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 6 months of solitary confinement, but he accomplished his goal of becoming a power man. The newly found status made his life in prison more bearable. In 1955, his wife filed for divorce. Gaskins was enraged and escaped from prison, stole a car and drove to Florida. He joined another carnival and found himself getting married for a second time. The marriage lasted 2 weeks. Gaskins then became involved with another carnival woman, Betty Gates, and the two drove to Cookeville, Tennessee, to bail Gates's brother out of jail. Gaskins went to the jail alone with bail money and cigarettes in hand, but his wife's brother was not there. Returning to the hotel they had checked into, he was in for a surprise. He found out his wife and her brother had stolen his car. Gates never returned to the hotel, but the police did, and Gaskins discovered that he had been duped. Gates's brother was actually her husband, who had escaped from prison with the aid of a razor blade tucked inside a carton of cigarettes. The police arrived at the hotel, and it didn't take them long to realize that Gaskins himself was an escaped convict. He was sent back to prison with an extra 9 months for aiding the escape of a prisoner. Later, he was also convicted of driving a stolen car across state lines and received 3 years in federal prison in Atlanta, Georgia. While there, he got to know mafia boss Frank Costello, who named him the Little Hatchet Man and told him he might have work for him in the future. In 1962, given another chance at freedom, Gaskins was arrested again, this time for the statutory rape of a 12-year-old girl. But he escaped to North Carolina in a stolen car. Once in North Carolina, he met a 17-year-old girl whom he married. After a spat, she turned him into the police for statutory rape, and he received 6 years in Columbia Penitentiary. In November 1968, he was paroled, and this time made a vow that he would never be caged again. In September 1969, he found a new way to abate them aggravated and bothersome feelings. Gaskins picked up a female hitchhiker in North Carolina and became angry when she laughed at his sexual propositions. He beat her until she was unconscious, then raped, sodomized, and tortured her. Then he went to a swamp and weighted her body so she would drown. His first murder triggered profound emotions and release, and satisfying those emotions became his driving force in life. He mastered the skill of torture, often keeping his injured victims alive for days. Sometimes he would cannibalize their severed body parts, and either make them watch him eat them in horror, or force them to eat their own flesh.
I am one of the few that truly understands what death and pain are all about. I have walked the same path as God. By taking lives and making others afraid of me, I become God's equal.
Gaskins said in his autobiography,
Through killing others, I became my own master. Through my own power, I come to my own redemption.
One murder, where he was close to the victim, included his 15-year-old niece, Janice Kirby, and her friend. He claimed their drug use infuriated him. He lured the girls to an abandoned house, where he attempted to rape them, and upon failing to do so, he beat them to death. In 1971, Gaskins picked up 16-year-old Ann Culberson near Myrtle Beach. He says she was very nice to him the whole time. He didn't necessarily feel that he needed to kill someone this time, but he decided to do it anyway. He turned off the highway and told Ann that he was taking her to a great barbecue place. They went to an empty house instead, and he kept her alive for 4 days of torture. He says that since she was so nice, he eventually knocked her out so she didn't have to scream so much. He dug a grave when he was done and buried her near the same area that Janice was buried. In 1973, Gaskins moved to Prospect, South Carolina. He soon felt the bothersome feelings and spotted a 14-year-old runaway, Jackie Freeman. Jackie had left home because her stepfather was abusing her. Gaskins drove the girl to an abandoned house he had found and tortured her for a few days. He also claims he sliced a few parts from her, cooked them and ate them. Although Gaskins preferred female victims, it did not stop him from doing the same to males when the opportunity presented itself. By 1975, he had killed over 80 young boys and girls he found along the North Carolina highways, and now he looked forward to his old bothersome feelings because it felt so good to him to relieve them through torture and murder. He considered his highway murders as weekend recreation time, and referred to killing personal acquaintances as serious murders. "20-year-old Martha Dix liked to hang around the garage where Pee-wee worked, and she typically visited a few times in the week. The two got along just fine, but Martha began joking about sleeping with Pee-wee and telling the other guys in the garage they had fooled around. He eventually had enough of the jokes and asked her to stick around one night after the garage was closed. He claims he told her to stop making fun of him. Her response was to flip him off. Martha disappeared for a few weeks, but she eventually came back to the garage and announced that she was pregnant with Pee-wee's child and that the baby was going to be named Pee-wee Dix. Gaskins calmly told her to stick around a while so they could talk. He told Martha that if she was going to say they slept together, they may as well do it. They went to his house and Gaskins killed Dix with acid he had stolen from a photographer after hearing him warn people, "Don't never handle this stuff up here," pointing to a developing chemical on a shelf. "It would kill you if you did." Gaskins said he poured a strong dose of the liquid into a Coca-Cola can. Almost at once, Martha started succumbing to the effects of it. Pee-wee said,
I gave her the Coca-Cola, and she drank that, and she tried to scream. She turned it up to her head, and the next thing I knowed, the bottle hit the floor.
He loaded her in the car and drove her to a farm and dumped her body in a ditch. Although Gaskins had a reputation for being erratic and bad-tempered, some people in the town just thought he was eccentric or mildly mentally disturbed. Most went with their gut feeling and avoided being around him. A few, though, actually took a liking to him and considered him a friend. One of these trusting souls who considered Gaskins a friend was Doreen Dempsey. Doreen was the mother of a 2-year-old baby girl and was pregnant with her second child at the time of her death. She needed a place to stay and was down on her luck. She asked if she could live with Pee-wee and his wife until the baby was born, but he said he didn't have enough room, but said she could stay in an old trailer he had. It wouldn't cost anything, but he expected sexual favors in return. Not long after, she decided to leave town and asked Gaskins if she could get a ride to the bus station. He went in the house and told his wife that he gave Doreen $20 for her journey and that he would take her to the station.
I don't know about the other people. I'm not really ashamed of the association I had with him.
He was always polite to me, and a lot of people he was polite and nice to, and I don't know why. He just had a mental problem already.
It surprised me that we had a person working here that was that close to us and the employees here, including the secretaries, that would be capable of murdering people.
Gaskins took Dempsey behind the house.
I was gonna talk with her, and she was about 7 months pregnant at the time again. And so I asked her who the daddy of the kid was that she was carrying right then. And it was another black kid from what she told me. We went on around to the fish pond, and we walked around the edge, and I just shoved her right in the pond and grabbed her by the feet and held her under. And then I went back and got the kid and done the same thing.
Gaskins swore he wasn't responsible for the child's crushed skull. That must have happened in the trunk of his car, a purple hearse equipped with steel casket holders, he said. In 1974, Pee-wee pulled up behind 2 hitchhikers with long hair and thought they were girls. It turned out that it was 2 14-year-old boys. He brought them to a hideout near Charleston, where he sodomized and tortured them. Then he cooked their genitals and ate them before killing them. He took their lifeless, mutilated bodies to marshland and sunk them. A year earlier, Gaskins had purchased an old hearse, telling people at his local bar that he needed the vehicle to haul all the people he killed to his private cemetery. The regulars just chuckled at his macabre sense of humor and thought to themselves, "Oh, Pee-wee and his tall tales." Horace Jones was just another car thief in the area who decided to pursue Pee-wee's wife when he was out of town for a few days. Gaskins said,
That pissed me off. Not so much him trying to fuck my wife, but the way he went about doing it. I mean, if he had come straight to me like a man and asked to make a deal with me for my wife, I probably would have given it to him for a night or a week. I'd keep if the offer were good enough.
Pee-wee had already dug the grave, so he led Horace to it, forced him to climb in, and shot him. In 1975, when Pee-wee was 42 years old, he was killing one person a month on average. One day, as he was driving to get spare parts for his garage, he spotted a van that was broken down on the highway. He stopped and with a smile asked if the young occupants required assistance. Happy that a knight in shining armor had come to their aid, they said please in unison. He fixed the van in a few minutes, but told the young travellers that it needed a new water pump, and he would be happy to take them to get it. He then lured the three into the woods, tortured them, and made them do vile things to each other while he watched. After he'd had his fun, he killed them and gave the swamp another fleshy offering. Previously, he had always been careful to murder without an accomplice, but he needed help getting rid of the van, so he reluctantly went to ex-con Walter Neely for help. Walter drove the van to Pee-wee's garage, where it was repainted so he could sell it. Later that same year, Pee-wee was offered a contract hit for $1,500 to kill a certain Silas Yates, a wealthy farmer from Florence County. The person who wanted the hit was Suzanne Kipper, who was a bitter ex-girlfriend of Yates. Silas was lured out of his home by an acquaintance of Gaskins, called Diane Neely, who claimed she was having car troubles. He came out to help, and Pee-wee quickly kidnapped him, slit his throat, and then buried the body post-haste. He had two witnesses watching and helping him. After considering the implications of this while sipping a beer on his porch, Gaskins realized that he needed to make sure the woman who set the hit up stayed quiet. He went to visit Suzanne Kipper to confirm they were on the same page. Once he saw her, he realized he had a yearning for her. So he informed her that he wanted to have her any time he felt the urge, and then he might not feel compelled to silence her. Suzanne hastily agreed to this. Diane Neely and her boyfriend, Avery Howard, decided they could make some bonus cash by blackmailing Pee-wee for $5,000 in hush money. Diane was the one who helped lure Yates outside to be murdered. Avery Howard was upset that Gaskins only gave Diane $300 to lure the man outside. He knew that Yates was a rich man, and he felt that she deserved a better deal. Diane went to Gaskins brazenly and asked for the $5,000. He smiled benignly, gave her a friendly hug, and said she was right. She deserved more money. He told the couple to meet him near Prospect to get what they deserved. The next night, he went to a club and made sure that he was very visible, so the locals would be his alibi. He eventually left the club discreetly and met up with Diane and Avery and generously bought them a bottle of bourbon to cement the deal. He told the couple that he had stashed the money in a safe that was in a hollowed-out tree in the middle of a swamp. Once there, they were promptly dispatched with a gun, and lowered into the hungry swamp.
You're the one calling me to take care.
In the summer of 1975, Pee Wee Gaskins was ready to marry again. Wife number 6 was 18 years old. They began meeting up with a group of people at the beach who would take their kids with them. 13-year-old Kim Gaskins was one of them, and Pee Wee liked her. When opportunities presented, he began touching her and eventually exposed himself. She got very upset and avoided being around Gaskins unless others were present. One day, he let Kim know that he was driving to Sumter, South Carolina, to visit his daughter, and asked her if she wanted to tag along. He gently smiled and whispered to her that he would be sure to keep his zipper well and truly zipped. Reassured, she agreed. A short way into the trip, he raped Kim, burned and cut her, and then stabbed her to death. He wanted to bury Kim at the same place he had buried Janice, but he couldn't because someone was now living in that house. Two local petty criminals robbed Pee Wee's repair shop, having no knowledge of what he was capable of. He found out who did it and killed them without much fuss. They were buried along with his other burgeoning collection of mouldering corpses in his privately run cemetery. Once again he called on Walter Neely to help him bury the two bodies. While there, Gaskins even proudly showed Neely the neat little grave plots. I wonder if it crossed Neely's mind at that moment that he might also eventually join the other occupants in this bone garden. After the disappearance of Kim Gaskins, tongues began to wag, and these mutterings soon came to the attention of the authorities, who began to become suspicious of Gaskins. After searching his apartment, they found clothing that had been worn by Gaskins. Not suspecting that he had killed the girl, Gaskins was indicted for contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Neely soon cracked under pressure awaiting trial and took police to Gaskins' secret cemetery. On April the 27th, 1976, Gaskins and Walter Neely were charged with 8 counts of murder. He was a small man with a high-pitched voice, cold, dead eyes and a direct manner. Infamous killer Pee Wee Gaskins was the definition of a human paradox. At first glance, Donald Henry Gaskins was less than menacing, but his 5'5", 130-pound frame oozed malevolence. He confessed in 1978 to murdering 15 people and burying their corpses in 3 PD counties. At least 4 of his victims were 15 or younger. He once told a judge,
"There's quite a few bodies that's never been mentioned, but you got enough for now. When they put me to death, I'll die remembering the freedom and pleasure of my life. I'll die knowing that there are others coming along to take my place, and that most of them will never get caught.
Pee Wee Gaskins told authorities they would find a body in the creek near this pine tree. Sled and Sumter County Sheriff's investigators began looking in the creek this morning, but they didn't find a body in the creek. On the bank, though, 100 feet away, they found skeletal remains.
Gaskins was serving 10 life sentences at the notorious Central Correctional Institution in Columbia when, in 1982, he carried out a contract, the revenge killing of death row inmate Rudolph Tyner. In March 1978, Rudolph Tyner, a 24-year-old junkie from New York, robbed a mom-and-pop grocery in Murrells Inlet, South Carolina. He took $200 and the lives of both Mom and Pop, Myrtle and Bill Moon. Tyner was quickly caught and sentenced to the electric chair. But with appeals and the general slow pace of executions in the United States, he was still in the land of the living 2 years later. This did not sit well with Myrtle's son from a previous marriage, Tony Kimo. Tired of waiting, Kimo decided to take justice into his own hands and started inquiring about someone on the inside who would be willing to speed up Tyner's death sentence. Kimo learned that there was someone more than willing to assist, Donald Pee Wee Gaskins, a trustee working on death row. Gaskins blew up Tyner by giving him a plastic cup that Tyner was told was an intercom. Gaskins let him know that at a certain time of the day he would attempt to communicate with the device. At the arranged time, Tyner put it to his ear. Gaskins said the last thing Tyner heard through the speaker cup was the sound of him laughing before Tyner's head exploded into fragments.
I need one electric chair and as much of a stick of damn dynamite as you can. I'll take a damn radio and rig it into a phone before he plugs it up. That son of a bitch will go off and there won't be no damn coming back on that.
That murder landed Gaskins on death row, but prison walls never stopped his scheming. 2 weeks before he became the 245th South Carolina prisoner to die in the electric chair, Gaskins plotted with his son to kidnap the 3-year-old daughter of then Columbia area solicitor Dick Harpootlian, whose prosecution moved Gaskins from a life sentence to his own date with death. On his last night in the condemned cell, Gaskins slashed his wrists and the crooks of his arms with a razor blade he had lodged in his throat and regurgitated. It took 20 stitches to keep him alive, long enough for justice to be carried out. Finally, at 1:10 a.m., September the 6th, 1991, he left this world to face all the souls he had sent from it prematurely.
Electricity was turned on to the electric chair at 104. It turned off at 106. He was pronounced dead at 1:10. We have carried out this execution with as much humanity and dignity as possible.
The sentence of the state of South Carolina versus Donald Gaskins was carried out at 1:10 a.m.
I'm ready now to call it right. Until next time, take care. This is Donald P.V. Gaskins saying so long for now.
This month's devoted patrons: Cheryl Dutter, Laura Jane, Hippie of the Sea, Bonita Martin, Susanna Andrea, Shelley Valadez, Laverne Hicks, Renee Poulin, Amy Stringfellow, Taffy Gries, Rebecca Norton, Jay Etchells, and Kelly Cortesis. I hope I pronounced those correctly. Apologies if I haven't. My dear friends, welcome to Beau's Lounge, situated in the downtown elegant Moonlight Theatre. I hope you've all survived the confrontation with Pee Wee Gaskins. My goodness, he doesn't look like a cold-blooded killer, or I should say he didn't. He didn't look like a cold-blooded killer, did he? He had quite a benign face, you know, sort of bloke you could sort of have a few beers with at the bar. Yeah, I can understand why the locals didn't suspect him. He obviously, He bore a grudge when somebody slighted him or did something to offend him. Because he was a small man, you know, he never forgot it. Instead of just turning the other cheek, he decided to get revenge and take the ultimate revenge by killing them. Really, quite shocking. Yeah, I'm not saying that all small men bear grudges because they're small, but Pee Wee Gaskin certainly had a small man syndrome. Okay, once this hits YouTube, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of comments from people who don't listen to the after chat or who haven't even bothered waiting for the after chat, who are going to say, yeah, but what about this? And what about what he did to Doreen Dempsey and the baby? And I really don't want to say exactly what is going around that he allegedly did to the baby, because I'm not even sure if it's true. Was this sort of stuff made up by some members of the internet community? I haven't read Gaskins' autobiography, which, by the way, he only agreed to if it was published after his death, because there was a lot of stuff that he wrote in there which was untrue, and they have proved that. He confessed to a lot of murders he couldn't have possibly done. He wanted to be a very notorious killer. He wanted that infamy, and so he made a lot of stuff up. And certain things that he alleged that he did wouldn't have went down well in the prison community, and he was a trustee, so he was always coming into contact with prisoners, which is why he said he only wanted this book published after his death, because if the other prisoners knew what he was alleging, I'm sure they would have, beat the crap out of him, or worse. So we have to take what Pee Wee confessed to with a pinch of salt, really. He got the detectives to take him out all the time looking for graves, which didn't exist, and the detectives in charge said that he was, he would limp. He would limp and pretend that he was sort of lame, but he could run like a rabbit, and he was hoping he'd get a chance to escape. There was once they went out there looking for graves, and there was a car circling round. They were sure that he was going to try and make a break, but there were so many of them around him and armed, he didn't have any chance. He definitely lied about a lot of stuff. I don't think he was a torture and cannibal type. I think he purely did these murders either one for money or two revenge, to get back at somebody who had slighted him or offended him or who had done him wrong. Oh yes, and also to make people disappear if he thought they would be a threat to his freedom, like Kim Gaskins. I'm not undermining how dangerous he was. He was a very dangerous and nasty little fella, and it's quite possible that he did commit some opportunity killings on the highway, young hitchhikers. That is quite possible. I could believe that, for sex, that he might have done that. But I don't think we'll ever know for sure. There were so many hitchhiker murders back in the 70s. There was a lot of young girls hitchhiking. My sister and her friend did it, and they nearly got abducted. It was a very dangerous time. You know, and a place like America and Australia is so huge. It's so huge. You know, you've got vast tracts of land where people could be hidden and buried. You're never going to find them again. My dog is walking around the room. She's a bit senile. She just wanders around, the poor bugger. Yeah, so I think this is possibly the longest video I've ever done. I really... Yeah, so Pee-wee just made up a lot of stuff. The people who actually had dealings with him in prison, they know that he made up a lot of stuff, even about his childhood getting beatings. They reckon that the mother lived with the grandparents. They were a very respectable family, actually, the grandparents, and who knows what the whole truth is and why Pee-wee determined along that path, because one of the historians said that she doesn't believe that he did get beaten as a child and that he was actually spoiled. He was very precocious. So I don't know. I have included the cannibal bits in here because it goes with the story, but I don't know. What do you think? Was he as mean as he made out himself in his book, his autobiography called The Final Truth? Which was written up by some guy I think called Wilson Earl. Not really sure on that. Yeah, The Final Truth. Anyway, that's Pee-wee's book if you want to read it. But as one guy said, I'll leave that snippet of what he said, of what he thinks about the book, and you can make your own mind up. Anyway, to get that to cleanse the palate after all that horrific torture and cannibalism, I've left a blooper at the end for you to leave you on a positive note. Anyway, my dear friends, I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback. God bless, take care, and goodbye until next time.
As it went on over time, he, began to really brag about it then. You have to know Pee-wee to understand that. Pee-wee was just one of those fellows that he wanted to be probably the biggest and the baddest that's ever been in South Carolina. And once he got started talking, you couldn't hardly shut him up then. He either shot you when you weren't looking, or he had some big fellow with him to hold you while he did something to you. It's called The Final Truth. The only truth in that book, there may have been 10% truth in it. The rest of it is all Pee-wee. Just trying to make Pee-wee a big name.
But she eventually came back to the garage and announced that she was pregnant with Pee-wee's child and that the baby was going to be named Pee-wee Dix. Oh dear. Gaskins calmly told her to stick around a while so they could talk. He told... Oh, sorry. He told Martha that if she was going to say they slept together... I can't get a straight line. Come on, get your act together. He told Martha that if she was going to say they slept... Stop it! Once you get the giggles, you can't stop.